Okay, I'd like to welcome everybody to this month's Literacy in the Discipline 612 webinar with Dr. Wanda Littlejohn and Dr. Fran Rogers, who are also current board members of Literacy in the Disciplines. I am Rochelle Savitz. I am president of Literacy in the Disciplines, as well as an associate professor of literacy at East Carolina University, which is in North Carolina, but I used to work in Clemson, at Clemson, and live in Greenville, South Carolina. And so that's kind of where this connection has come from. Today, we are really going to learn from these two wonderful people about coaching teachers in disciplinary literacy. So just the brief background, Dr. Littlejohn is in Greenville County Schools, as well as Dr. Rogers. Dr. Littlejohn is a native of North Augusta, South Carolina, and has 22 years experience in the field of education with a background in science. Currently, she is an instructional specialist at Carolina High School, where she provides professional development for teachers. Her passion is working with educators to provide engaging and equitable learning experiences for students. Additionally, she enjoys spending time with her 15-year-old son and shopping. And then Dr. Rogers is an experienced educator in Greenville, South Carolina, with a diverse background in middle school and high school education. She has served in various instructional positions at the school and district levels, including classroom teacher, instructional coach, and secondary academic instructional specialist. Regardless of her role, Dr. Rogers remains committed to fostering a supportive, inclusive, engaging, and literacy-rich academic environment for all learners, whether K-12 students or adult learners. She finds immense joy in staying connected to and advocating for students and educators, continually seeking new ways to inspire and elevate educational outcomes. The only other thing to share that is kind of background, because I forgot to say it in the beginning, we do want to thank our sponsors. South Carolina Middle Grades Initiative is who funds the organization, as well as our speakers. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and pass it over to Dr. Rogers and Dr. Littlejohn.
Thank you so much for that wonderful introduction. I get the pleasure of kicking us off on behalf of myself and Dr. Fran Rogers. We definitely thank you so much for coming tonight to talk a little bit about coaching teachers in disciplinary literacy. So the session outcomes for tonight are listed on the screen. We want to equip you with tools and strategies that you might need to enhance literacy across all subject areas, and additionally provide you with strategies for coaching teachers in reading, writing, and thinking skills that will support those disciplines. Our brief agenda is we will start with defining disciplinary literacy. Why is this needed in public education? We'll talk about some coaching strategies, and then hopefully at the end, you'll be able to make your own connections. And so I am going to turn it over to Dr. Fran Rogers.
Hey guys, as Dr. Littlejohn said, we're very excited that you are here joining us tonight. So since we're going to talk a little bit about coaching teachers in disciplinary literacy, we just think it's important to ensure that we are all on the same page regarding what is disciplinary literacy. So there's some information there on the screen, but in a nutshell, disciplinary literacy is truly how we do the work of the respective discipline. So it's the way that we read, the way that we write, the way that we talk, and the ways that we think and listen within each respective discipline. All right, so clearly example and then a non-example. So disciplinary literacy is not the same thing as content literacy. So disciplinary literacy are going to be really highlighting the knowledge and the skills that students need within particular disciplines, compared to generalized strategies that you can use when reading, writing, or thinking across any discipline. So we've provided some examples there on the screen, but these would include examples such as just having a list of vocabulary words and reading the definition, or a generalized reading strategy such as summarizing. We did want to draw attention to Shanahan had a great quote in a source that we've also provided all of the sources. So should you want to go and access some of those, you are more than welcome to do so. But the one that we connected with and it resonated with us is you guys read texts differently than other people, and you've got to let kids in on that. And you have to have a set of strategies and approaches that actually allow you to successfully take on the books in your field. So it's the way that, as content level experts, you interact with text, the way that you talk about your discipline, the way that you essentially do any work in your discipline. We have to equip our students with those types of skills in order for them to be successful. All right, why do we need disciplinary literacy? So, outside of, I'm sure we could come up with a laundry list of things, but Dr. Littlejohn and I decided to really hone in on the profile of the South Carolina graduate. So, when you look at the expectations for our learners in South Carolina specifically, but of course it's not limited to South Carolina, you can root the need for that within those world-class knowledge and skill set that are necessary or that we ask of our learners by the time that they graduate high school. The way that those things manifest are, if you look to the right of your screen, you'll see some competency statements. And if you haven't had an opportunity to explore some of those competencies and continuums, they are absolutely amazing. They are from the learner's perspective. But you can see there that things such as reading critically. So if we're going to read critically within a particular discipline, that sets a need for us to understand that we need to know how to read in that specific discipline. The same way with expressing ideas. If we want to communicate in writing or verbally, we need to understand what are the strategies and resources we can use within each respective discipline to do that work. And then lastly, of course, our standards in South Carolina really help us to root the work. There is an expectation that manifests throughout all of the content specific standards that ask kids to do deep literacy rich tasks that are unique to each discipline. So those of you who are South Carolina educators, I think that's everyone here right now. You are well versed in the standards and understand the expectations that those standards provide. I see you shaking your head. No. But that information, it is linked there should you want to explore, but I'm certain that it's very similar to other states or Common Core state standards as well. I do want to share the one kind of quote at the bottom of the screen, or the one piece of information that we've extracted. Is it's more about disciplinary literacy is more about a centering instruction. We deliver content of a discipline through the processes. So the way that we do the work of the discipline. So I might be learning about something, but the way in which I learn about it is rooted in those disciplinary literacy specific skill sets.
All right, so before we get you to actually do some work, I'm going to model something for you. We are going to look at a set of standards, and you are going to do this in just a minute with a different set of standards. Basically, we want to see, like, where in the standard do you see the connection to disciplinary literacy? So at the bottom, you see the quote that says, disciplinary literacy is a recognition that each field has a different body of text, a different type of text that readers have to read, and that readers really have to have a different stance. So I am going to model for you what I would like, what Fran and I would like for you to do with a different set of standards. So here are the science standards. And science is broken up into three different dimensions. You have the science and engineering practices. These are things that scientists and engineers do. Then you have those cross-cutting concepts. These are the skill sets that we want students to be able to, like, practice. Can they recognize patterns? Do they see cause and effect? Do they see stability and change across all sciences? And then we have the DCIs. In all science standards, you're going to have physical sciences, life sciences, earth and space, and then those engineering and technology standards. So that is K through 12. But what I want someone to do is to look at these SEPs, CCCs, and DCIs to see if they can figure out, like, why is disciplinary literacy showing up in a science class? Why is there a need? So I'll give you a minute to take a look at what's on the screen, and then we'll have somebody unmute. Where is the disciplinary literacy showing up? All right, so you've had a little bit of time to kind of look at what this is saying. And so in science, when we think of literacy, we want students to read, write, think, and talk. So where is that showing up in this three-dimensional science classroom? Anyone can unmute and say.
Would be the SEPs, right? Is that what you are looking for?
Okay, so give me some specific, like, where would you see students speaking, reading, talking, thinking in the SEPs?
All of them, I think. You could do something with all of them.
That's correct. So asking questions. You can ask a question through talking. You can write it. You can develop and use models through reading, writing, talking, listening, all of those things. So there is a huge need in science for us to understand what disciplinary literacy means. So now I'm going to ask you to pull out your phone or whatever device you're on. And I want you to take a few minutes to explore any content area other than science.
And guys, I've
And
dropped
let's
just
see
for
where you see those connections.
Dr. Littlejohn, I apologize for interrupting.
Oh,
I was just
sorry.
going to share
Go
that
ahead.
I've
No, you
dropped
go
that
ahead.
link. I've dropped the link to the South Carolina state standards should you want to use those. But I also understand for North Carolina, you guys are welcome to use your standards as well.
So your task is to consider ways that the quote in the blue box below applies to whatever standard you chose to look at. So we'll give you a couple minutes to peruse some standards, and then we'll open up the floor. All right, so at this time, anyone is open to share. Please tell us what discipline you chose to look at and how does this quote apply to that discipline standards?
I can speak. I'm in the current math standards, looking at mathematical process standards, and all of the process standards apply to that blue box. But specifically, I'm reading number 6. It says communicate mathematically and approach mathematical situations with precision. And then there's, it expresses what that means. But that idea of communicating like a mathematician through precision and mathematical language, and through the discipline and discourse of math. The word communicate is so broad. My mind, whenever we talk about literacy in general, I think it's just like the world that we're in. My mind goes to the 4 language domains, and saying communicate could kind of represent any of those 4 domains. So that's where my mind goes with what's in the blue and the math process standards.
Thank you so much for sharing. Anyone else want to share what they see?
I can go ahead. I looked at middle school physical education, and it's standard A42. It's execute a conflict resolution strategy to resolve potential conflicts in a game or physical activity. An example is to negotiate an acceptable penalty in a flag football game with the opposing team. And so that incorporates a ton of speaking and listening, but also the idea of reading, because they have to be able to comprehend the rules and the expectations to be able to engage in negotiating conflicts.
That's good. Thank you for sharing. Do we have one more?
I'll go. So I was looking at a North Carolina standard, since that's where I am. One of the 8th grade social studies standards says, summarize the democratic ideals outlined in the founding documents of the state and national government. So I went to debate in my mind, and speaking and backing up your stance on certain things, and being able to read those historical documents to back up your reasoning of why you're on a certain side of things, which obviously you'd have to be very careful doing that in a public school, but definitely an option.
Thank you all for sharing that. As you can see, it doesn't matter if you're PE, science, math, social studies, the way students have to engage with the content, you cannot not have these strategies in your classroom. And as coaches, you should always see these things happening in classrooms where there's discourse around having academic discussions and proving an answer, and students asking questions using that academic vocabulary. And it's different from a PE class to a math class. And so I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Rogers. She's going to talk about the coaching stance.
All right, guys. So since we kind of all have a uniform understanding of where we're going with disciplinary literacy and really why that need exists, let's get to probably the heart of why you're here, the coaching aspect, right? So we before we kind of launch into some tools and strategies, because we do have some of those for you guys, we just want to really center ourselves on some key reminders that applies across the board for coaching in general, but specifically for disciplinary literacy. These are going to be rooted in coaches really serving as a co-learner and a support in helping teachers internalize disciplinary literacy shifts. So a lot of times professional educators, they understand the gist of disciplinary literacy. They really just need someone to partner alongside of them to help them engage in the work. So on the right hand side, we have what we'd like to say are just 5 key reminders for when we are partnering with professional educators in a co-learner stance as a coach. So number one is we do need to have an understanding of the discipline. So the requirement is not to be an expert in every single discipline, but you to be a co-learner in in um, in that coaching conversation. You have to come with something in your mind, right? You have to have an understanding. You have to have some knowledge and expertise that you can draw upon. So that is the first key reminder. The second key reminder is be sure to identify the needs of the teacher. So this can be through conversations, any observational data, needs expressed by the teacher, and then always make sure to value the experience that the teacher brings to the table. That is very, very important. The third key reminder is to always be equipped and prepared to model effective practices, just so we don't get lost in that loop of what is theory compared to what is action. Because something can sound very good in theory, but then actually walking it out when you have students sitting in front of you can sometimes be a challenge. So being equipped and prepared to model effective practices is always a key practice. Number four is work together to engage in observations and feedback. So you can have co-constructed lessons, so lessons that you have co-planned and designed together, and then you have strategic look-fors. So while you're in the lesson, what are things that we're looking for? And then number five is ensuring that we co-develop and that we work together to design those discipline specific literacy tasks. So it's not just as the coach, you just show up and ask a good question and say, this will be nice for you to use. You actually lock arms with that professional educator and support that work. All right. So the disciplinary literacy coaching toolbox. So, of course, as we just talked about those 5 key reminders, keep that at the center of everything that you do. Always understanding, as the quote on the previous slide emphasizes, you do not want to show up as a know it all. You want to show up as I'm a partner in this work, and we are going to co construct some things, and then we're going to co deliver that, and then develop an understanding of where we go next for our learners. So keep those 5 key reminders at the center of everything that you do. Make sure that everything that you do is being rooted in student learning goals. So what our students need is at the forefront, and then what we might need to do as contributing teacher practices for those goals. That's the work that we do together. And then ensure that we are focusing conversations on what students will do in each discipline. And so on the screen, you can see just some different stems there. So for example, when students in math read, they ... Okay. So in order to understand that, we have a disciplinary literacy table. Dr. Littlejohn, if you will just open that. And we've also linked the resource that we got that through. It came from Ed Leadership. Oh, you got to get a new tab. Sorry, I didn't think about that. I apologize for that.
It's all right. I'm good.
So this table does a really good job of just kind of, it's a one pager that would be excellent for a coaching binder. So that way, when we are posing questions, they are rooted through this lens. So if we're wanting students to engage in some specific tasks, we would want them to read and ask questions in science centered around the why. So you would ask a coaching question that would correspond with what we want students to do. So if this type of table can serve as basically some look-fors in what we're wanting for our students, how can we pose questions that get us closer to the heart of that work? And guys, in the meantime, I am also going to drop like a direct link, even though it's hyperlinked in the presentation. I'm going to drop a direct link into the chat so that way you can have that resource as well. But again, just another solid resource that you can keep in your coaching materials that show things. Okay, if we are looking in our learners, we want them to be able to read and identify bias, then I need to consider how might I ask a question. And it honestly can be that direct when planning, co-planning with the teacher. How are we going to ask kids to read authentic text that where they can identify bias, and what scaffolds and structures are we going to provide in order for them to be successful? So these are just really good reminders that say this is what we would need our learners to do, and then you can center your coaching questions around that work. Another similar document that we have linked for you, it is a companion guide, or if you're not familiar with the book Disciplinary Literacy in Action, it is an absolutely incredible resource. So just because of copyright, documentation, and information, we want to be sure to respect all of that. But there is a companion guide, and I'm going to see while Dr. Littlejohn works to find that. I'm going to pull this resource. So if you wanted to navigate along, you could have it as well. So it brings you to the companion guide website for the text Disciplinary Literacy in Action. And clearly in our allotted time, we can't do a deep dive into every single discipline, but this text does dive into a lot of different aspects of the discipline. But we would like to draw your attention to the very last bullet, which are the appendices. So we'll open those. And then once you select that link, and I apologize, Wanda, I know this has you going in and out a lot. So thank you for being so gracious.
No problem.
So once you select that link, it's actually going to give you a download. And in that download, there's a list of various disciplines, and then what our learners should be doing within those disciplines. Okay, so let me give you an example. Let's see here. I'm going to pull up the example, and I know that Dr. Littlejohn is screen sharing, but so for example, when scientists write, they use precise wording. When scientists write, they generate questions. So as you can see, it is very similar to the work that was presented in the singular table. It's very similar in that way, but it basically gives you pages in isolation. So if you say, well, I primarily coach science specifically, then I would say using the companion guide is going to be your better resource. If you coach a variety of subject areas, I would say that the table would be the most helpful resource. Okay. And then one other thing we wanted to touch on quickly, just consider different frameworks that exist that can help you to do this work. If you are unfamiliar with Talk, Read, Talk, Write, it is another fabulous resource. So we've really just provided a link. That way, if you would like to access that book and explore that type of framework, and again, that is one framework, and there are a lot of different frameworks that you can use, but it's simplistic enough to where when you're supporting teachers and working with students, they get into the groove of they're going to be provided with some form of text. It might be an image, it might be a chart, it might be a graph, it might be a written passage, and then they are going to engage in strategic talk around that. And then they are going to read something and analyze it in order to engage in another talk opportunity. And then in closing, they are going to synthesize what it is that they've learned in writing. So you can see where the title of the book, Talk, Read, Talk, Write, comes from. But again, that's just to show that there are some frameworks that exist that can help you in this work. Okay. The next piece, and we hope that that you're excited about this resource, is we have worked to really give you some specific coaching questions for each discipline that center in when we want students to read and write and think and talk. And so while Dr. Littlejohn is grabbing that one, I'm going to pull that link and drop it in the chat as well. So she has it projected here. But as you can see, each discipline has its own section. And within each section, you're going to have questions that you can ask that are tailored to reading. So if you are planning an authentic reading task with a teacher, what are some direct questions that you can ask that get us closer to hitting that mark of disciplinary literacy within that classroom? So these examples are tailored to what we would like to say are the core four, right? So English, math, science, and social studies. But you will begin to notice trends that you can modify these questions to hit a variety of different places. And we will, in just a little bit, talk about some different lesson examples. And that way, you will be able to apply some of these questions to those lessons to practice some of that skill set between what I would like for students to do or those look fors within that specific discipline, and how do I ask the best question to for it to elicit the type of thinking and action that we need for that to come to fruition. So again, the core four, that's accessible there. Understanding that we can modify those question stems to hit other disciplines as well. And then lastly, this is actually a very recent addition. Wanda and I added this today. But, sometimes we worry about, okay, once I'm partnering alongside the work of disciplinary literacy with the teacher, like what happens when I step away? So we wanted to include some reflective questions for you as a coach to think through. If our ultimate goal is to build that collective ownership and that sustainable capacity over the course of time, what are some things that we might need to think about as coaches that can move folks closer to the mark when we do walk away? So, for example, did I work with the teacher in a way that gave them ownership and choice? So, as a coach, when we engage in that type of practice, teachers are more likely when we step away to continue to own the material and make those choices. So, we just wanted to kind of give you some of those reflection questions. If you would like to read that full blog post, we have included that link below. So, that is accessible. But we will have an opportunity momentarily for you to practice with some of those coaching questions, making a connection to some lessons.
All right, so I'm going to ask you to pull up those possible coaching questions because we're getting ready to kind of practice using those. So we're going to ask you to look at a question, figure out, how would you coach a teacher in this particular discipline? And so we're going to look at a few examples. And the first example we're going to look at is science. So I want you to go to your discipline questions and find the science section. And we are going to look at a sample science lesson.
Funding for this program is provided by Annenberg Learner.
Can you all hear it?
The liquid has gone from a greenish blue color to what? Clear. So what's one thing that interests you about what you see?
The final empirical formula is still CuCl2 times 2H2O. So the initial mass is
I want to give you a brief bit of information about a claim. A claim should be 1 or 2 sentences only, and it should be a statement about the results of your lab work, and it should answer the beginning question. If you ask students, what is this problem really about? They can't say. They can't make those connections easily. So the way I develop literacy skills in the classroom, I focus on claims, evidence, and reasoning. And the way I do that is through experiment. Today's lesson was based on what we did the previous lesson. Hey guys, take a note of what you should be doing right now on the board. The students heated up a hydrated salt to determine the empirical formula of it.
the rest is like on the bottom.
What makes their initial investigation slightly different than what's typically done is they were working off of a beginning question. Does the empirical formula of a hydrate depend on the initial mass? Instead of just doing the lab to verify results, the students will do an experiment, they will collect their data, and then they will make a claim based on that data. So all of the different groups look at the data, and from that data, they construct a claim. But first, they need to figure out what makes a good quality claim. On each lab bench, I have 2 claims, Claim A and Claim B. I want you to determine as a group which claim is the strong claim.
Because that's a dependent and independent variable. Yeah, because that's just like an observation.
Yeah.
Yeah.
This is with temperature. And claim B is my product was a yellow solution. Claim A. You think B? I think it's claim A.
It's not B.
Yeah, I
mean,
think
like
it's A.
based on like the actual solution, it's like it went from, like blue, like a blue green to like clear.
This is like an observation. Yeah.
Yeah. Like,
So guys, make sure that you get these observations into your notebook, because what we're doing here is we're developing evidence, and it's going to be the evidence that supports the claim that comes later in the class.
He definitely encourages us to help each other. He wants us to ask other people in our group to make sure that we all understand it as a whole.
This one, it's saying if the temperature increases, the product goes to yellow.
Yeah, but it would be like, if it, because it's shorter, it would say like, the temperature is lower.
See, that's the point. That's the point. That's what another thing that makes this one better, because reading this, you have a good idea what the beginning question is.
True, yeah,
Well,
yeah,
this
yeah.
one,
This
you're
one
just
you're
like, what?
kind of guessing.
Yeah.
And then the students were to construct their own quality claims about their lab. Does the empirical formula of the hydrate depend on the initial mass of the hydrate? Based on your observations, what can you claim about that? All right.
All right, so that was a snippet of a 10th grade science class. And so my question for you, we have our question stems, we're in the science section, is how does this example connect to the science standards, which are listed to the right? And what are your thoughts on coaching a science teacher to implement this strategy? So how does this example connect to the standards? And then what are your thoughts on coaching a science teacher in implementing the claim, evidence, and reason strategy? Whoever wants to answer, you're free to unmute.
So what's standing out to me is the SCP of analyzing and interpreting data. There's a few connections there, but that's the one that I keep coming back to, and looking at the possible coaching questions under the science thinking um, category. Number 10 says, how do you encourage students to think critically by questioning their own conclusions and considering alternative explanations? So the teacher had set up the class to where students were able to have a dialogue with each other about their claim statements, questioning each other, and having to justify their reasoning behind their claim statements and improving each other's. So that's the area that I would go down.
Thank you for sharing. Now we're going to move to math. So we're going to look at those math questions. And this is a 6th grade math problem. And I'm going to show you. Wait a minute. I'm going to exit out. If you've ever heard of the 3-act task, this is a 6th grade act 1. So this is how the teacher would introduce the problem, showing them this video. And so listed here on the side are the mathematical process standards. You saw the gas pump going up. Who would like to take a guess as to how much money was actually spent based on what they saw in the video? There's definitely no right or wrong answer. How much gas do you think they bought?
That was very fast, Dr. Littlejohn.
Okay.
I was about to say, I feel
me.
like the kids, like I need to see it again now
Okay.
that you've asked the question.
I will be the one to say it.
We will, I'll show it again. How much money do you think was spent at the pump? All right, we were at 2 gallons, 2.3 gallons. What are our thoughts?
I was gonna say like $5, $6.
Okay.
That's what
That's
I
a
was
great,
gonna say too. Probably
great
around
guess.
$6.
Great guess. So you ask the students that question, and then in Act 2, you provide them with these 3 images. You tell them it was $6.82, which y'all were very close. You show them a picture of how many miles the car has gone on that take of gas. And then you give them some information about what type of fuel it was, how many gallons the tank will hold, estimated miles per gallon. And you ask an additional question: what information would be useful to figure out how much money was spent? And what questions do you have by looking at the images? So this is Act 2, and this is what this math teacher would ask the students. So how does implementing a problem like this connect to the math standards? And what thoughts do you have about coaching a math teacher on implementing these types of problems in their instruction? So I'll go back to those math process standards.
I think that it connects to the real world context.
Absolutely. It's a real world problem. And how would we coach a teacher into using those types of problems?
Hi, everybody. As I'm watching the examples, I'm thinking about the interaction of modeling and questioning in a coaching kind of relationship. I guess I'm thinking about particularly middle and then high school math and science teachers who might be predominantly lecturing or just kind of working through problem sets in a book, who might be pretty far from the practices that you're showing. And it makes me just wonder, about the power of modeling. Even just the few moments of video that you've shown are so powerful that it's really that combination of kind of modeling or showing examples of what it could look like, then coupled with the questioning. I guess I'm thinking about how challenging it might be if you're starting with a teacher whose practice is pretty traditional, kind of, in a math and science environment. Just asking a few questions may not get them jump started as much as modeling and questioning kind of in combination. That's where my mind goes.
I love that. Coaching is definitely not a one size fit all. That's where, when Dr. Rogers talked about those things to remember, the needs of your teacher, you need to know where they're at in order for them to go from traditional lecture math class to doing 3-act math problems. You may have to model.
It's a
And
big jump. Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
you're going to have to show, hey, look at this. What do you think about introducing this, and how does this fit to the standard? Like, you're going to have to do a little bit more than questioning. So thank you for sharing that. I'm going to toss the mic over to Dr. Rogers for social studies.
Okay, it wouldn't be in true Fran fashion if I did not drop one more link. It's for math, but it opens the door for some really good conversations. It is a playlist in YouTube centered around silent solutions. It's another just good opportunity because sometimes in math, folks are like, "Oh God, text! Like they need to read this long thing." Well, no, that's the critical piece of disciplinary literacy, right? Is that text needs to be authentic to that discipline, but experiences such as engaging in 3-act math tasks and silent solutions, it gives students an opportunity. It opens the door wide for many places for us to think differently, to engage in conversations in different ways. But I also do agree that we have to remember that modeling in conjunction with asking the right questions is critically important. But when we put things in front of students that there may not be just one clear right or wrong answer in the beginning, it allows them to take more risks, which opens the door for them to engage in disciplinary literacy. So, sorry, I know that was a little off script, but thought I would offer another option for math because sometimes that can be a little hard, a little difficult. All right, so for social studies, Dr. Littlejohn has done a great job of kind of doing a deep dive into some of the other examples. So for social studies, I want to talk over the lesson. There is a link in the presentation should you want to peruse that, but that learning goal is there. And so basically through this learning experience, students are examining sources to compare the perspectives of the loyalists and the patriots. And then they're working through that process of how do we read, how do we engage in discussion, how do we write to communicate our learnings and our findings. So we have provided an example there, but the one thing I do want to say is with the South Carolina Social Studies standards specifically, with the historical thinking skills, you have to put things in front of students for them to engage with, right? So how can we accomplish comparing anything if we don't have sourcing or information to actually compare. So we can't do the work that is required of the discipline unless we release those opportunities to students. So those historical thinking skills, the geography thinking skills are very similar in that way as well. So just a reminder that in social studies can be a challenge. And one thing that I will consistently ask is, so what evidence of student learning does this task afford us? Right? So if we're working together on something, if we just have students jotting notes, which are based off of our thinking and processing, what learning has actually occurred, and that becomes difficult to measure because what we can witness are students writing down information, but we don't really have a measure of what they have learned or have taken away from the lesson. So that's kind of social studies. So since Dr. Littlejohn did such a good job of deep diving us through that process of here's a lesson, let's connect it to the standards, and then let's reference our coaching questions. You have those resources in your hands that you can reference back to. And then lastly, outside of social studies, within the context of the Core 4, we also have provided for your reference a link to a sample ELA lesson, and to show you how you do the work of the discipline the same way through English in ways that differ from content area literacy that are outside of just critical vocabulary, outside of general skills of summarizing and such. So that information is there as well, should you want to take a look at that lesson and then compare your coaching stems to that. But we hope that through this experience of kind of getting those key reminders, building your toolbox with the types of coaching questions, resources, and frameworks that you might use, that you are able to take some of these and implement those, especially after the practice of saying, here's a lesson, let's now partner that with the standards and the coaching questions to see what might be good coaching questions we ask, but also not forgetting how we might need to model or co-deliver some of these learning experiences in classrooms with students.
All right, so we are going to do a quick assessment to see, like, did you learn from this experience? So I am going to show you a few minutes of a clip of a social studies class. Give me 1 second. So what we're looking for is, the first thing I want you to find out, is this content area literacy or is it disciplinary literacy? And what historical thinking skill is being addressed? It's a very quick clip.
To learn how FDR used the government and called on citizens to get America out of the Great Depression. Anybody have any questions on that part of the purpose? So kind of like a two-parter there, how FDR used the government and called on the citizens, like all of us, to get us out of the Great Depression. Language purpose, we're going to be throwing this around. Interdependence, how we are dependent upon each other. And then finally, socially, that's why we're all sitting in groups of 4 today, our social purpose. You'll be working as a table group to discuss and interpret FDR's 1933 inaugural speech. The way we'll be doing this, tackling this purpose, is a close reading. We're going to be looking at, again, FDR's speech, inaugural speech from 1933. We know what an inauguration is. It's like the first day you're president, you're sworn in.
All right. Just on that brief clip, was that disciplinary literacy or was it content area literacy? They were going to do a close read activity.
I feel like those words right there make it content area because I do that a lot in my reading class. So
Very
that's
good.
what I thought.
So close reading is just something you can do in any content. It wasn't specific. It's not a specific skill to social studies. And could you have identified what the historical thinking skill was? No. All right, so think about how you would coach that teacher. We're going to end our webinar here. We definitely thank you all for participating and actually, engaging in the work. But in the back of your mind, you're going to have that social studies teacher in your building who will do the content area literacy. How can you shift them from the close read to doing something a little bit more historical thinking in the discipline? So I want you to ponder that, think about that, and I'm going to turn it back over to Dr. Savitt.
Oh, it's coming back to me. I wasn't
Yes.
prepared for that. So thank you, Dr. Rogers, Dr. Littlejohn, for sharing. Thank you all for coming and interacting. Thank you. I'm going to totally put him on the spot, but thank you, Dr. Ippolito. If you have read his books, he writes a lot on disciplinary literacy and on literacy coaching. So this was an honor to have you here and to be able to engage and share your thoughts along with our wonderful presenters and board members. There are a few, we're welcome to stay. You're welcome. We are all welcome to stay for a few moments if you have any questions for our two wonderful presenters. Otherwise, I will send out an email with a follow-up assessment, just, making sure that checking in, and if you have other ideas for other sessions that are coming up. But that is questions for Dr. Littlejohn and Dr. Rogers.